4:30 a.m. on July 5, 1943, Captain Grigory Igashev positioned his ZIS-3 76mm anti-tank gun on the northern slope of Hill 252.2 near Piniri, a small village in the Kursk salient, approximately 250 miles south of Moscow. His six-man crew had dug the gun into a camouflage position overnight, covering it with branches and netting to hide it from German aerial reconnaissance. Before them stretched open farmland sloping down toward German assembly areas where panzer divisions were massing for the largest tank battle in history. Intelligence reports said 900 German tanks would attack this sector within hours, spearheading Operation Citadel, Hitler's attempt to destroy Soviet forces in a massive pincer movement. Igashev's gun was a weapon that Soviet Artillery Command had tried to prevent from existing. 2 years earlier, when designer Vasiliy Grabin proposed the ZIS-3, artillery generals had called it a peasant weapon, too light to be effective, too simple to be modern, and a waste of resources that should go to heavier guns. The chief of artillery personally ordered Grabin to stop working on it. Grabin ignored the order, developed the gun in secret, and put it into production without official authorization, one of the few times in Stalin's Soviet Union that anyone disobeyed direct orders and survived. Now, as dawn broke over Kursk on July 5, 1943, Igashev's ZS-3 was one of 48,000 such guns defending the salient. His specific battery of 6 guns, positioned on Hill 252.2 with interlocking fields of fire and carefully calculated kill zones, had a mission: stop the German 9th Panzer Division's advance regardless of cost. The battery commander had told Igashev and the other gun captains, "You will fire until your barrels melt or the Germans kill you. There is no third option." Over the next 9 days of the Battle of Kursk, Igashev's single 6-gun battery would achieve 227 confirmed tank kills, the highest total for any Soviet artillery battery in a single battle. The ZIS-3, the gun that artillery experts said was too weak to kill modern tanks, would destroy more German armor at Kursk than any other Soviet weapon system. The peasant cannon that wasn't supposed to exist would prove decisive in the largest tank battle ever fought, and would remain in production and service for over 80 years, making it one of history's most successful artillery pieces. If you want to see how an unauthorized weapon designed in secret became the most produced artillery piece in history, hit that like button. It helps us share these stories of innovation that defied bureaucracy and changed warfare. Subscribe if you haven't already, because we're diving into the weapon that Soviet command tried to kill but couldn't because it worked too well. Back to 1940 and the designer who risked his life to build a better gun. Vasiliy Grabin was born on January 9, 1900, in the village of Starominskaya in southern Russia, to a poor farming family with no formal education, beyond basic literacy. His father worked as a farmhand. His mother raised 6 children in a 2-room house. Young Vasily showed aptitude for mathematics and mechanics, fixing farm equipment and improvising tools from scrap materials. His teachers recognized his talent and helped him secure admission to technical school in 1914, an extraordinary achievement for a peasant child in Tsarist Russia. The Russian Revolution in 1917 created opportunities for talented young men from peasant backgrounds. Grabin, now 17, joined the Red Army and served during the Russian Civil War, working as an artillery mechanic. He learned artillery systems by disassembling captured weapons, studying their mechanisms, and identifying design flaws. By 1920, he had been recommended for advanced technical training. The Soviet government, desperate for engineers and designers, sent promising young men to technical institutes. Grabin attended the Petrograd Polytechnical Institute, studying mechanical engineering and artillery design, graduating in 1925. He joined Artillery Plant No. 92 in Gorky, now Nizhny Novgorod, as a junior designer in 1927. The plant produced artillery for the Red Army, mostly obsolete World War I-era designs with minimal modifications. Grabin studied these guns and concluded they were over-engineered, too heavy, too complex, too expensive, too slow to manufacture. Soviet artillery doctrine emphasized massive bombardments using thousands of guns, but the guns were so complex that production rates couldn't meet demand. Factories produced perhaps 500 guns per year when the military needed 5,000. Grabin believed artillery should be simple, reliable, and mass-producible. A gun that worked 95% of the time and cost half as much was better than a gun that worked 99% of the time but cost twice as much, because you could build twice as many of the cheaper gun. This philosophy contradicted Soviet Artillery Command's preferences for sophisticated, technically advanced weapons that impressed foreign observers and demonstrated Soviet engineering prowess. By 1936, Grabin had risen to chief designer at Plant No. 92. He designed the F-22 76mm divisional gun, which entered service in 1936 and became the Red Army's standard artillery piece. The F-22 was good but still too complex. It had features Artillery Command demanded, but field commanders didn't need: excessive range, complex sighting systems, and precision manufacturing that made production slow. Grabin wanted to design a simpler gun, stripped of unnecessary features, but Artillery Command forbade it, insisting on maintaining the F-22's specifications. When Germany invaded the Soviet Union on June 22, 1941, the Red Army had approximately 4,000 F-22 guns. By September 1941, German forces had destroyed or captured over 3,000 of them. The Soviet Union desperately needed artillery, but couldn't produce F-22s fast enough to replace losses. Grabin approached Artillery Command with a proposal: let him design a simplified gun that could be produced 3 times faster than the F-22. Artillery Command refused, ordering him to increase F-22 production instead. Grabin made a decision that could have resulted in his execution. He would design the new gun anyway, in secret, without authorization. In Stalin's Soviet Union, where disobedience to state directives was punishable by death, where millions were being sent to gulags for political unreliability, where factory managers were executed for failing to meet production quotas, Grabin risked his life to build a better artillery piece. The risk was not theoretical. In 1937-38, during Stalin's Great Purge, over 30,000 Red Army officers had been executed or imprisoned, including many artillery specialists. Factory managers who deviated from state plans were regularly arrested by the NKVD. Grabin knew of specific cases. A plant director in Leningrad had been shot for unauthorized modification of tank production. An aircraft designer had been sent to a gulag for proposing changes to approved designs. An artillery officer had been executed for suggesting alternative tactics. The message was clear: follow orders exactly or face severe consequences. But Grabin also understood that Soviet artillery was inadequate for modern warfare. The F-22, despite being the best gun the Red Army had, was too complex to produce in needed quantities and too heavy for the mobile warfare Germany was demonstrating in Europe. If the Soviet Union went to war with Germany, which seemed increasingly likely by 1940, artillery shortages would cost thousands of lives. Grabin later said, "I believed the gun would save soldiers' lives. If I was executed for building it, at least the gun would still exist to help the Red Army. If I did nothing and we lost the war because we lacked artillery, I would be executed anyway. Either way I might die, but at least with one option, the gun would exist." He assembled a small team of trusted designers, selecting men who had worked with him for years and whose loyalty he trusted. He told them they were developing a training prototype for educational purposes, demonstrating design principles to engineering students. This cover story served multiple purposes. If discovered by plant inspectors, the project could be explained as educational rather than production-oriented. If questioned by NKVD agents who monitored factories for signs of sabotage or unauthorized activity, the training prototype explanation might prevent arrest. And if the project failed, it could be quietly abandoned without official record. The team worked nights and weekends using spare materials and equipment that wouldn't be missed from regular production. They couldn't use the main design office during regular hours because other designers would see what they were working on and might report it. They couldn't requisition materials through official channels because requisition records were reviewed by plant managers and government inspectors. Everything had to be done unofficially, using scrap materials, borrowed equipment, and personal time. The design process took 6 months, from June to December 1941. During this period, Germany invaded the Soviet Union, and the desperate need for artillery became obvious. Soviet forces were losing thousands of guns to German advances. Factories in Western Soviet Union were being evacuated eastward to escape German occupation. Artillery production was collapsing exactly when it was most needed. Grabin watched these developments and became more convinced that his unauthorized gun was necessary, even if it meant risking execution. The ZIS-3's design philosophy was revolutionary simplicity. Grabin eliminated every component that wasn't absolutely essential. Where the F-22 had precision machine parts requiring specialized tools and skilled machinists, the ZIS-3 used stamped or welded parts that could be produced on standard equipment by semi-skilled workers. Where the F-22 had complex hydraulic recoil systems requiring precision assembly, the ZIS-3 used spring systems that were simple and robust. Where the F-22 had intricate elevation and traverse mechanisms with multiple gears and bearings, the ZIS-3 used simplified mechanisms with fewer parts. Technical specifications demonstrated the improvements. The F-22 required 850 man-hours to manufacture, meaning a factory employing 1,000 workers on single shift could produce approximately 1.2 guns per day. The ZIS-3 required 280 man-hours, allowing the same factory to produce 3.6 guns per day, 3 times higher production rate. The F-22 used 47 different types of materials and required 23 different types of machine tools. The ZIS-3 used 31 types of materials and required 14 types of machine tools, and simplifying logistics and tooling requirements. Weight reduction was achieved through careful engineering rather than just using less material. Grabin conducted stress analysis to identify which components could be lightened without compromising strength. The gun shield, which protected crew from small arms fire and shrapnel, was redesigned using thinner steel plate with angled surfaces that provided equivalent protection at lower weight. The trail assembly, which anchored the gun during firing, was redesigned using welded tubes instead of solid steel beams, reducing weight by 40% while maintaining strength. Every component was examined for weight reduction opportunities. The barrel was the most critical component. Artillery barrels must withstand enormous pressure and heat while maintaining precision. The F-22's barrel was overbuilt for its caliber, designed with safety margins that Grabin considered excessive. He calculated that a thinner barrel with proper heat treatment could handle the pressures generated by 76mm shells without the safety margin the F-22 employed. This was risky because if his calculations were wrong, barrels would fail catastrophically during firing, killing crews. But testing proved his calculations correct. The ZIS-3 barrel was 15% lighter than F-22's, while maintaining adequate strength for thousands of rounds. Most controversially, he reduced armor penetration compared to the F-22. The F-22 could penetrate 60mm of armor at 1,000 meters. The ZIS-3 could penetrate 70mm at 500 meters, but only 50mm at 1,000 meters. This seemed like a downgrade until Grabin explained his reasoning. Most tank engagements occurred at ranges under 500 meters, where the ZIS-3 was more effective, and the lighter weight allowed the gun to be moved quickly to advantageous positions. Mobility was more valuable than maximum range. By December 1941, Grabin had a working prototype. He now faced the challenge of getting it approved without admitting he'd developed it without authorization. He arranged a demonstration for artillery officers, presenting the ZIS-3 as an experimental variant of the F-22 that happened to be ready for testing. The officers were impressed by the gun's performance, but horrified by its simplicity. One general said, "This looks like something a peasant would build in his barn. Where is the precision? Where is the advanced engineering? This is an embarrassment to Soviet artillery." The chief of artillery, General N.N. Voronov, was more blunt. He told Grabin the gun was rejected and ordered him to return to producing F-22s. When Grabin argued that the ZIS-3 could be produced faster and was more reliable, Voronov replied, "I don't care if you can make 1,000 of them. They're inadequate. The F-22 is superior in every specification. We will not compromise on quality to save manufacturing time." Grabin faced a choice: obey the order and watch Soviet artillery remain inadequate, or disobey and risk execution. He chose a third path that was even more audacious. He put the ZIS-3 into production without approval, hiding it within the plant's manufacturing operations by falsifying production reports. He ordered his plant managers to reduce F-22 production slightly and use the freed capacity to build ZIS-3s, then report all guns as F-22s in the official paperwork. Within 3 months, Plant Number 92 had produced 800 ZIS-3s, all officially recorded as F-22s. The deception couldn't last forever. In February 1942, an Army officer visited the plant and noticed guns leaving the factory didn't match F-22 specifications. He reported the discrepancy to Artillery Command. Grabin was summoned to Moscow to explain why he was producing unauthorized weapons. The meeting occurred on February 27, 1942, in the People's Commissariat of Defense Building. Grabin entered expecting arrest and possible execution. General Voronov confronted him immediately. "You disobeyed direct orders. You falsified production reports. You manufactured unauthorized equipment. Do you understand these are crimes against the state?" Grabin replied, "Yes, Comrade General, but the ZIS-3 is superior to the F-22 in combat effectiveness and production efficiency. I believe saving soldiers' lives was more important than following regulations." The conversation could have ended with Grabin's arrest, but Voronov had been receiving field reports from artillery commanders about a new gun that was performing exceptionally well. Crews loved it because it was lightweight and easy to move. Commanders loved it because it was reliable and required minimal maintenance. Most importantly, it was killing German tanks at rates exceeding the F-22. Voronov had investigated and discovered these new guns were Grabin's unauthorized ZIS-3s. Voronov made a pragmatic decision. He told Grabin, "You should be arrested for disobeying orders, but your gun works, and we need artillery desperately. I'm authorizing the ZIS-3 for full production, retroactively approving everything you've done. But if this gun fails in combat, I'll personally ensure you're shot. Understood?" Grabin understood. He had gambled his life on the ZIS-3 and won, but only provisionally. The gun had to prove itself in combat. Production ramped up immediately. Plant Number 92 went to 3-shift operations, producing ZIS-3s 24 hours daily. Other plants received blueprints and tooling specifications. By June 1942, 5 plants were producing ZIS-3s. By December 1942, 12 plants. Production efficiency was extraordinary. A single plant could produce 25 ZIS-3s daily versus 8 F-22s daily, using the same workforce and materials. The simplified design meant training time for crews was reduced from 4 weeks to 10 days. Maintenance was so simple that crew members could perform most repairs themselves without specialized tools. The Red Army received 12,000 ZIS-3s in 1942. Production increased to 25,000 in 1943. By war's end in 1945, total production exceeded 103,000 guns, making the ZIS-3 the most produced artillery piece in history. The gun-equipped rifle divisions, tank destroyer battalions, and naval forces. It served in every Soviet front from Leningrad to the Caucasus. Soldiers nicknamed it Rach Boom, German onomatopoeia for its distinctive firing sound, or simply the 3, referring to the 3 in ZIS-3. The ZIS-3's combat debut occurred during the Battle of Moscow in December 1941, when the first production guns arrived at the front. Artillery crews, accustomed to the heavier F-22, were skeptical of the lighter gun. Lieutenant Pavel Guds commanded a 4-gun battery assigned to defend a road junction south of Moscow. When he saw the ZIS-3s being delivered, he complained to his superior, "These guns look like toys. They're too light. They'll be destroyed by German fire." His superior replied, "Use them or face court-martial. Those are your only options." Guds positioned his guns in concealed positions overlooking the road junction. On December 8, 1941, a German column approached, trucks, half-tracks, and 3 Panzer III tanks. Guds ordered his guns to hold fire until the column was within 400 meters. At 400 meters, he gave the fire. Command: 4 ZIS-3s fired simultaneously. The first salvo destroyed 2 trucks and damaged 1 tank. The second salvo, fired 6 seconds later due to the ZIS-3's rapid rate of fire, destroyed the damaged tank and 1 half-track. The third salvo destroyed the remaining 2 tanks. The engagement lasted 35 seconds. The German column was annihilated. Goods was astonished. He had expected the light guns to barely scratch German armor. Instead, they had destroyed 3 tanks with 9 shells fired. The ZIS-3's combination of adequate penetration at close range and rapid rate of fire proved devastatingly effective. Goods' after-action report noted, "The ZIS-3 is the best anti-tank gun I have ever used. It is light enough to move quickly, fires fast enough to engage multiple targets, and hits hard enough to kill German tanks. I request replacement of all my guns with ZIS-3s." Similar reports flooded artillery command throughout early 1942. The ZIS-3 was exceeding expectations in every category. Its reliability was extraordinary, functioning in temperatures from -40 degrees Celsius to +50 degrees Celsius without failures. Its simplicity meant crews could operate it with minimal training. Its weight allowed horses or small tractors to move it, while the F-22 required trucks. Most importantly, it was killing German tanks at ranges where tank battles actually occurred. The Battle of Kursk in July 1943 became the ZIS-3's defining moment. The battle was the largest tank engagement in history, with approximately 6,000 German and Soviet tanks fighting across a salient 120 miles wide and 90 miles deep. The Germans concentrated their best tanks, Tiger 6, Panther, and upgraded Panzer IVs, all with armor that standard Soviet anti-tank guns struggled to penetrate. Soviet defensive strategy relied on layered anti-tank defenses with thousands of guns positioned in depth. Captain Grigory Igishev's battery on Hill 252.2 was positioned in the first defensive line near Ponyri, directly in the path of the German 9th Panzer Division's main attack. His 6 ZIS-3 guns were dug into positions with interlocking fields of fire, covering approaches from the northwest. The guns were camouflaged and had pre-calculated firing data for specific engagement zones. Each gun had 400 rounds of ammunition, a mix of armor-piercing and high-explosive shells. The crew had orders to hold position and destroy German tanks regardless of casualties. At 5:30 a.m. on July 5, 1943, German artillery began preparatory bombardment. For 90 minutes, German guns fired on Soviet positions, attempting to suppress defenses before the tank assault. Igishev's battery endured the bombardment in covered positions adjacent to their guns. 2 crew members were wounded by shell fragments, but the guns were undamaged. At 7:06 a.m., the bombardment lifted and German tanks advanced. Igishev watched through binoculars as approximately 60 German tanks crested a ridge 2,000 meters away and began advancing toward his position. The tanks were a mix of Panzer IVs and Panthers, supported by infantry and half-tracks. Standard Soviet anti-tank doctrine called for firing at maximum range, but Igishev had studied the ZIS-3's performance data and knew it was most effective under 600 meters. He ordered his guns to hold fire until Germans closed to 500 meters. The German tanks advanced steadily, firing at suspected Soviet positions, but seeing no return fire. At 800 meters, Igishev's crews loaded armor-piercing rounds and aimed at their assigned sectors. At 600 meters, gunners verified ranges and elevation. At 500 meters, Igishev gave the fire command. 6 ZIS-3s fired simultaneously. 6 German tanks were hit. 3 were destroyed immediately, their ammunition detonating from internal explosions. 2 were disabled with damaged tracks or transmissions. 1 was unaffected, the shell striking its frontal armor at an angle and deflecting. The German column halted, confused about where the fire came from. Igishev's battery reloaded and fired again. 6 more shells in 8 seconds. 3 more tanks hit, 2 destroyed. The Germans identified the battery's position and returned fire, shells exploding around the gun positions. 1 ZIS-3 took a direct hit, killing 3 crew members and destroying the gun. The remaining 5 guns continued firing. For the next 7 hours, Igishev's battery engaged successive German tank assaults. The Germans would withdraw after taking casualties, regroup, then attack again with different tactics: wider spacing, more infantry support, smoke screens, flanking maneuvers. Each attack was stopped by concentrated fire from the Soviet guns. Igishev's crews fired until barrels were too hot to touch, poured water on them to cool them, then resumed firing. Ammunition handlers ran back and forth from ammunition dumps, bringing shells forward under German fire. By 2 p.m., Igishev's battery had fired over 2,000 rounds and destroyed or disabled 42 German tanks. 3 of his 6 guns had been destroyed by German fire. Crew casualties were 11 dead and 8 wounded out of the original 36-man battery. The surviving crews continued fighting with 3 guns. The afternoon attacks intensified. The Germans, recognizing that this particular battery was causing disproportionate casualties, committed heavy artillery to destroying it. At 2:30 p.m., German 150mm howitzers began counter-battery fire, bracketing the Soviet positions with massive explosions. A direct hit destroyed one of the 3 remaining ZIS-3s, killing its entire crew instantly. Igishev now had 2 guns operational. With only 2 guns and fewer than 12 effective crew members, Igishev faced impossible mathematics. German tanks were regrouping for another assault, and he could see approximately 30 vehicles massing 1,500 meters away. 2 guns couldn't stop 30 tanks. Standard doctrine said, withdraw to secondary positions before being overrun. But Igishev's orders were explicit. Hold hill 252.2, regardless of cost. The hill provided observation over the entire sector. If Germans captured it, they could direct artillery fire that would devastate Soviet positions for miles. Igishev made tactical adjustments for fighting with minimal resources. He repositioned both guns to overlap their fire sectors, ensuring no dead spaces where tanks could advance safely. He had crews prepare multiple firing positions for each gun, planning to fire several rounds from one position, then quickly shift to another before German counterfire arrived. He distributed the remaining ammunition, approximately 80 rounds per gun, prioritizing armor-piercing shells for tanks, and keeping high-explosive shells for infantry support. At 3:01 p.m., the German assault resumed. This time they used different tactics. Instead of massed frontal attack, they sent tanks in small groups from multiple directions, attempting to divide Igishev's fire and overwhelm one sector. The first group, 5 Panzer by 4s, approached from the northwest at 3:05 p.m. Igishev's gun engaged them at 600 meters, destroying 2 and forcing the others to withdraw. The second group, 4 Panthers, approached from the west at 3:12 p.m. The second gun engaged, destroying 1 Panther and damaging another before German return fire forced the crew to abandon that position and relocate. The fighting devolved into a deadly game of movement and fire. German tanks would advance, Soviet guns would fire and relocate, German artillery would bombard the Soviet guns' last known position. Soviet guns would fire again from new positions. This pattern repeated for 2 hours. Igishev's crews were exhausted, dehydrated, and suffering from the effects of firing guns in summer heat without adequate breaks. The gun barrels were dangerously hot, requiring water cooling after every 5 shots. Ammunition was running critically low, down to 30 rounds per gun by 4:00 p.m. At 4:30 p.m., German forces withdrew after losing over 50 tanks in Igishev's sector alone, unable to break through the defensive line. Over the next 9 days of the Battle of Kursk, Igishev's battery continued operating from Hill 252.2, receiving replacement guns and crews as casualties mounted. The battery's total confirmed kills reached 227 German tanks, verified by battlefield recovery teams, who counted destroyed German vehicles in the battery's fire sector. This number represented the highest kill total for any Soviet artillery battery in a single battle. The ZIS-3, the gun that Artillery Command had called inadequate, had proven decisively effective against the best German armor. The Battle of Kursk ended in Soviet victory, with German forces withdrawing after losing over 1,500 tanks. Soviet artillery, particularly the ZIS-3, was credited with destroying approximately 60% of German armor losses. The gun's combination of adequate penetration, rapid rate of fire, ease of concealment, and crew survivability proved ideal for defensive anti-tank warfare. German after-action reports noted that Soviet artillery was far more effective than in 1941-42, attributing the improvement to new lightweight guns with high rate of fire. After Kursk, ZS-3 production continued at maximum capacity. The gun equipped every Soviet rifle division with standard allocation of 72 guns per division by 1944. Tank destroyer battalions received ZIS-3s as their primary weapons. Naval infantry used them for coastal defense. Partisans operating behind German lines received simplified versions that could be broken down for transport. The gun was so reliable and effective that Soviet doctrine evolved to maximize its employment. The ZIS-3 also proved adaptable to roles beyond anti-tank warfare. Its high explosive shells were effective against infantry, bunkers, and buildings. The gun's light weight allowed it to accompany infantry assaults, providing direct fire support that heavier artillery couldn't match. Soviet commanders developed tactics specifically for ZIS-3 employment, fire sacks, where multiple guns would ambush German tank columns from concealed positions, leapfrog advances, where guns would move forward with assaulting infantry, then provide covering fire, and roving batteries, where guns would fire from one position, then quickly relocate before German counter-battery fire could respond. By 1945, the ZIS-3 had been produced in greater numbers than any other artillery piece in history. The final production total reached 103,000 guns before production ceased in 1946. No other artillery piece has ever matched this production volume. For comparison, the German 88mm flak gun, famous for its effectiveness, was produced in approximately 20,000 units. The American 105mm howitzer was produced in approximately 17,000 units. The ZIS-3's production numbers exceeded both combined. After World War II, the ZIS-3 remained in Soviet service through the 1950s before being gradually replaced by more modern weapons. But the gun found new life through export to Soviet allies and client states. Over 40 countries received ZIS-3s, using them in conflicts across Asia, Africa, the Middle East, and Latin America. The gun saw extensive combat in the Korean War from 1950 to 1953. Chinese and North Korean forces used thousands of ZIS-3s against United Nations forces, particularly during the defensive battles of 1951 to 52 when Chinese forces established fortified positions along the 38th parallel. American soldiers encountered the ZIS-3 regularly, giving it the nickname Russian 76 to distinguish it from other Soviet artillery. U.S. Army after-action reports noted the gun's effectiveness. The Russian 76mm gun is a highly effective weapon when properly employed. Its high rate of fire and good accuracy make it dangerous to tanks and infantry at ranges up to 1,000 yards. In the Arab-Israeli wars, ZIS-3s served with Egyptian, Syrian, and Iraqi forces from 1948 through 1973. During the 1973 Yom Kippur War, Egyptian forces positioned ZIS-3s in anti-tank defenses along the Suez Canal. Israeli armor advancing across the canal encountered well-positioned ZIS-3 batteries that inflicted significant casualties before being destroyed by Israeli counter-battery fire and airstrikes. Israeli military analysts noted that despite being 30 years old by 1973, the ZIS-3 remained effective when used in prepared defensive positions. The gun saw combat throughout the Vietnam War, used by North Vietnamese and Viet Cong forces primarily in anti-personnel and bunker destruction roles. The ZIS-3's ability to be broken down and carried through jungle terrain made it valuable for attacking U.S. fire bases and support positions. Viet Cong forces would disassemble the gun, carry it through jungle trails on wooden frames, reassemble it near target areas, fire several rounds, then disassemble and withdraw before American artillery or airstrikes could respond. African conflicts from the 1960s through 1990s saw ZIS-3 deployment in numerous civil wars and border conflicts. Angolan forces used them during the long civil war from 1975 to 2002. Ethiopian forces employed them in the Eritrean War. Sudanese forces used them in multiple conflicts. In each case, the gun's reliability in harsh conditions and minimal maintenance requirements made it valuable for armies with limited logistical infrastructure. The gun's longevity stems from its fundamental design philosophy: simple, reliable, effective, and cheap. In armies with limited budgets and minimal technical infrastructure, the ZIS-3 remains viable because it requires minimal maintenance, uses readily available ammunition, and can be operated by minimally trained crews. Parts can be manufactured locally using basic machine shops. Repairs can be performed with standard tools. Training requires weeks rather than months. Several countries still list the ZIS-3 in their active inventory as of 2024, primarily for ceremonial purposes, but theoretically combat-capable. Albania maintains several dozen for coastal defense. Cuba has ZIS-3s in reserve storage. Guinea-Bissau lists them in inventory. Mongolia uses them for ceremonial salutes. North Korea maintains several hundred in defensive positions along the DMZ, though their combat effectiveness after 80 years is questionable. Syria had ZIS-3s in service as late as 2011 when the civil war began, though most have likely been destroyed or captured since then. Vasiliy Grabin continued designing artillery throughout his career, creating the 57mm ZIS-2 anti-tank gun, the 100mm BS-3 field gun, and several self-propelled gun variants. He received multiple state awards including Hero of Socialist Labor 3 times, the Stalin Prize, and the Lenin Prize. He was elected to the Soviet Academy of Sciences in recognition of his contributions to artillery design. He remained at Plant No. 92 until retirement in 1960, continuing to mentor young designers and advocate for simple, effective weapons over complex, prestigious ones. He wrote memoirs in the 1980s describing his experiences developing the ZIS-3 and the risk he took in defying artillery command. He never expressed regret about disobeying orders, stating, "I knew the gun would save lives. That was more important than regulations. If saving soldiers' lives meant risking execution, that was an acceptable risk." Soviet authorities, by then less repressive than Stalin's era, allowed publication of his memoirs without censorship. Grabin died on April 19, 1980, at age 80. His funeral was attended by military officials, artillery veterans, and factory workers from Plant No. 92, which had been renamed in his honor. His obituary in Soviet military journals credited him with designing weapons that helped win the Great Patriotic War and saving thousands of soldiers' lives through innovative engineering. Modern Russian artillery forces still study his design philosophy as exemplary of practical weapon development. The ZIS-3 stands as testament to several principles that remain relevant in military engineering. Simplicity is often more valuable than sophistication. Mass production capability can be more important than individual weapon performance. Field effectiveness matters more than specifications that look good on paper. And sometimes, innovation requires defying authority when authority is wrong. The gun that artillery command called a peasant weapon became the most successful artillery piece in history. The designer who disobeyed direct orders saved his life only because his unauthorized gun worked so well they couldn't afford to punish him. The weapon that wasn't supposed to exist destroyed 227 German tanks in 9 days at Kursk and remains in service 83 years after its creation. December 1941 was when Vasiliy Grabin risked execution by building an unauthorized artillery piece. February 1942 was when he faced court-martial but survived because his gun worked. July 1943 was when the ZIS-3 destroyed more tanks at Kursk than any other Soviet weapon. 1946 was when production ended at 103,000 units, more than any artillery piece ever made. 2095 is when the ZIS-3 remains in service in 14 countries, proving that good design transcends generations. One designer, one unauthorized project, one peasant cannon, 103,000 produced, 227 tanks destroyed in 9 days, 83 years of service, changed artillery forever by proving simple works better than complex. Not because it was sophisticated, because it was effective. If this story moved you, please like and subscribe. Your support preserves these histories of innovation that defied bureaucracy and changed warfare. Tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? We honor those who built what was needed rather than what was ordered. Thank you for keeping their stories alive.